come to the last day of material for the class. I know is a little weird because we still have a week and a half left, so I just want to give everyone an overview of what is ahead of us. So today we're finishing chapter 8. On Friday's class, we will have a review session where I'll go over questions people have about this unit, which is chapter 7, the nervous system, and chapter 8, your senses. We'll have a review session Friday. Your exam will go live on Monday. On Friday's review session, I'll also go over I'll re-go over the format of the exam, go over questions people have about what's on the exam. Okay, so Friday review, Monday your exam, and then Wednesday is the last day of classes. We're not supposed to have classes on next Friday, May 1st. The semester is already over. So next Wednesday we'll do a review session for the final exam. So questions you have, anything from chapters 1 through 8. So we've got class, a review session, an exam, a review session. Okay. And all of that, a lot. We're going to try and get through it. I'm going to go to Canvas now and show you guys the last few things you have to do for the semester. As always, question, put it in chat. Okay, so on your Canvas, so what you'll see here is you've got a module. This is how you're going to access midterm 3 when it goes live, and you have to do these items in order. So what on Monday, April 27th, starting at 9 a.m., this will be open. You'll have 24 hours to do both parts. You have to do it in one setting in a 2-hour block. So you look at your schedule, you pick a 2-hour block, sit down, you take it, you access it via the home page. On Monday, the assignment page and the quizzes page, those will be blocked. So you'll have to do it through this module window, and that's because it will then allow me to time how long it takes you to do both parts and to better monitor what's going on. So you got to do it through this part. Okay. Let's look at the assignment tab here. Don't have a lot here. Upcoming assignments, so you guys have that cranial nerve worksheet due tonight at midnight, and then the other thing due tonight is topics you want me to review on Friday. So far, I've had only one person submit questions, and they were good. A good 3 questions. So if that's all we get, then that is what I will go over on Friday. Otherwise, if you have a question, ask it by midnight tonight. You have your last discussion board for the week, some questions about the senses, and then remember the things you found interesting or confusing week 5. So the last 2 discussion board posts. And that is it for the material, for the assignments for the semester. Okay, so let's now finish the content here. Let's finish chapter 8. Getting excited. Okay, so make sure I chat up. Awesome. Where we had left off is we had finished talking about vision, and then we had moved to our ears. We had gone over the different parts of the ear, the external ear, the middle ear, and our inner ear. And we had discussed how our inner ear actually hears sounds, right? Sound is a wave, and there are 2 components that we're concerned with, frequency and volume. Frequency is detected by the size of the hair that bends. If it's a short hair, close to the beginning, high-pitched noise, long floppy hair. It's low-pitched noises, long and low. Remember it that way. Volume is the duration of how long it's bent. That signal gets sent via your cochlear nerve, your auditory cortex, and your temporal lobe. So not a far journey for sound information, unlike visual information, right? It's got a long way to go. It's got to go all the way to the back of the eye, and then from the back of the eye all the way to the back of the brain. So visual information travels a great distance. Auditory information, nice and short. Okay. We're now going to talk about a few disorders associated with hearing. The first is otitis media. This is the name we give for ear infections. Ear infections are when there is a usually bacterial infection in that middle ear. So remember, the middle ear is an air-filled compartment, and it's supposed to just be filled with air. but sometimes fluid can go up from those eustachian tubes, which remember are connected to your throat. So if you get a lot of postnasal drip sometimes, that fluid can build up and can go into your ears, and the fluid could get stuck in that middle ear compartment. This is, again, more common in kids because they have very short eustachian tubes compared to adults, and also their eustachian tubes are more horizontal. In adults, our eustachian tubes are kind of at a diagonal, and so if fluid starts to move up, it should, by gravity, kind of drip on down back to our mouth. However, with kids, because they're horizontal, it's much easier for fluid to get stuck, flow through that eustachian tube and get stuck in the middle ear. And that's where you can get an infection. If it happens a lot to kids, they can get things called PE tubes or pressure equalizer tubes, also called tympanostomy tubes. And what this does is it's a little, this is what the picture is showing. It's like literally a little piece of plastic they put in the kid's ear to hold open that eustachian tube and give them some drainage. And it will fall out naturally on its own, and this helps kids if they have chronic ear infections. Helps equalize their pressure. It's a very common procedure, so it looks weird because it's literally plastic in your ear, but very common, very common. Okay. I also want to talk about deafness. So deafness is any degree of hearing loss, and it falls into two major categories: conduction deafness, which is an issue of the sound wave transmitting through the external and middle ear, and sensory neural deafness, which is an issue with a nervous system structure. Something in the cochlea, remember those hair cells, fire action potentials, they're neurons, right? Those are neural deficits. There are cranial nerve, which is a neuron, which is a group of neurons of cranial nerve, to our auditory cortex in our brain, neurons, okay? So if the issue is with a nervous system structure, that's a sensory neural deafness. And if the issue is a blockage or something wrong with the external or middle ear, that's conduction deafness. Conduction deafness, a lot easier to treat. Common example is like earwax impaction. So if you use a lot of Q-tips, you get a buildup of earwax, block the sound waves from hitting your tympanic membrane. Easy to fix. They're going to drain out some of that earwax, clear it out for you. Good to go. Okay. You can also have damage to your eardrum, burst eardrum, tympanic membrane. That can cause conduction deafness or a brief bit of conduction deafness. That'll heal. Your tympanic membrane will heal. You'll be fine eventually. Sensory neural deafness, as we know, nervous tissue, postmitotic, not going to get better. So if you have sensory neural deafness, that is deafness that is not going to fix itself. And this is where you're going to need some help. So hearing aids, what they do is they amplify the sound waves. So hearing aids are usually the first line, and they're good for people who have some damage to some of their hair cells. So if you damage some of your hair cells, for example, if you hear really loud music for a long time, or if you hear an explosion or something, you might get some sensory neural deafness in that some of your hair cells might be damaged. Now, this is my little soapbox for the moment. People who listen to loud music in headphones, you are killing your hair cells. Your hair cells, once they are damaged, they will not repair themselves. They will not get better. So you want to listen to music in headphones that it's just loud enough that you can hear and not loud enough that everyone else around you can hear. So if someone sitting next to you can hear the music from your headphones, it is too loud and you need to turn it down because you're going to damage your hair cells and you'll have to get a hearing aid at like 45. Okay? So don't do that. Also, if you go to a loud event like a concert, be the cool kid who brings earplugs because, again, that protect those hair cells. They're damaged, they're gone forever. Now, people who have very severe sensory neural damage, especially if they've lost all their hair cells or they have some sort of genetic disorder where they have damage to their cochlea, this is where they can get a cochlear implant. And so this bypasses the ear and it stimulates the auditory nerve directly. So it's surgically implanted into the person's skull and it will directly stimulate the auditory nerve. And so if your whole cochlea is damaged, usually by a genetic form of deafness, you're going to go for a cochlear implant. So clinical scenario here, you got an 86-year-old man. He has suspected hearing loss. He has a hard time following conversations when it's loud. And what type of hearing loss does he have? What frequency? So this is presbycusis, which is age-related hearing loss. Usually sensory neural, so usually it's damage to those hair cells. And this happens to most people as they get older. So most people as they get older, over time, you've accumulated damage to enough hair cells. And it starts usually with high frequency because those are the ones that are closest to that oval window. And so the first ones to go are going to be the high pitch noises. Those are usually the first hair cells damaged. So as we get older, most people will have some hearing loss associated with hair cell loss. When I was in, this is going to age me, but whatever. When I was in high school, cell phones were just starting to become a thing, and there was a ringtone you could get for your cell phone that was a high-pitched noise. This is before people had vibrate. So before you could just like take your phone and put it on vibrate, you could set your ringtone to be a high-pitched noise, and the thought was that your teachers are old and they're not going to be able to hear the high-pitched noise, and so they won't know that your phone is on. Didn't really work, but it was interesting in concept, and it goes back to this idea that the first hair cells that are damaged in people are those high-pitched noises. And so as we age, we get a hard time hearing those high-pitched sounds. Okay, so we have gone through the parts of the ear. Let's now talk about the other structures of the inner ear that help us with equilibrium. Skip that. So equilibrium means balance. It does not have anything to do with chemistry. We're not talking about molecules or reactions at equilibrium. If you give me answers on an exam about chemical reactions and molecules, I'm going to laugh, cry, not give you any points. So again, we're not talking about a chemical reaction here. Equilibrium in anatomy, it means balance. And we have two different types of equilibrium. The first is our static equilibrium. So this is the position of your head with respect to gravity. So your head up and down. So when you bend down, stand up, what is telling you what is up versus down, that directionality, that is determined by your static equilibrium. And this is with a structure called the vestibule. And inside it has these receptors called the maculae, and they're going to also have hair cells. And what is interesting about static equilibrium is that it's not a fluid that's moving and bending the hair cells. It's actually these little salt crystals called otoliths. And so your otoliths, as you move your head, will flow and they'll hit hair cells. And those hair cells in the maculae, located in our vestibule, will then bend and they'll send that information down the vestibular nerve, which will join the cochlear nerve and it will become cranial nerve 8, our vestibulocochlear nerve. So again, in the vestibule, you have these receptors called maculae that have these little hair cells. And they're going to sense your head position by the movement of otoliths, the movement of salts. Again, what that looks like, so if your head is straight, you don't have any otoliths moving, and as you move, the otoliths are going to move and bend those hair cells and send a signal. Okay, dynamic equilibrium. This is your rotational balance. So if you spin around in a tight circle, you're using your dynamic equilibrium. And that's because it has these interesting structures called semicircular canals. And each semicircular canal is in a plane of movement. So you have one up and down, you've got one that's horizontal, and one that's like coming at you, right? So we've got 3 different planes that are represented by semicircular canals. And as the fluid as you spin, it will send the fluid moving through one or more of those semicircular canals. And the fluid at the end will reach the region called the ampulla and has this specific structure called your crista ampullaris that has little cupula, which are the cells that have the hair cells. So, it's a lot of vocab. In the vestibule is for static. In the dynamic, we're talking about the semicircular canals. So fluid is going to move through our semicircular canal, and it will end in the ampulla. The ampulla has a structure called the crista ampullaris, and they have cupulas that have little hair cells. And when the fluid moves through the semicircular canal, it will bend that hair cell, and it will tell your brain, hey, she's spinning a little bit in the horizontal direction. Again, this is what that looks like. Endolith is the name we give for the fluid. In the ampulla, it's going to go to the crista ampullaris, and the cupula here is a cell, and it has little hair cells. The fluid is going to move the hair cells in the cupula of our crista ampullaris located in our ampulla. And that happens, for example, if you are a wonderful figure skater, you spin around in a tight circle, you're going to move the fluid, it's going to move the hair cells in our cupula, and it's going to send that signal, hey, we're spinning. So that is the end of years, the end of years. We're now briefly going to talk about our last two special senses, and brief because they're not as complicated as vision and hearing. I think vision is probably, in my opinion, like the most complicated. Hearing and balance are the next level of complicated. Smell and taste, pretty darn simple. Okay, so our objectives for this last part are to describe the location, structure, and function of olfactory meaning smell, and taste receptors, and to name our 5 taste sensations. So olfactory receptors are on the roof of your nasal cavity. And this is, like ears are very close to where they're processed, your sense of smell is very close to where it's processed. So the olfactory tract and olfactory bulb is located right above on the top of your nose. And what you're going to do is as you breathe in through your nose or you sniff something, in the air are little chemical particles. So smell is the detection of chemicals, the detection of molecules. And they're going to bind to those chemical receptors, and they're going to send that signal through your olfactory tract. So again, if we zoom in here, we've got a mucus layer that lines your nose. You've got little olfactory hairs here and olfactory receptor cells. And what's going to happen for olfaction is that the chemical that you're smelling, whether it's a sugar or a salt or some sort of sour taste smell, that's going to bind to a chemical receptor in our olfactory receptor cells, and it will send a signal up our olfactory nerve into our olfactory bulb. And the bulb will then send information to your cortex and to your limbic system. The limbic system is important because smells are very tied to emotional memory. So if you think back to, for example, to a memory growing up, a lot of times you can have a sense of smell associated with it. So for me, my grandma used to make this like really yummy baked French toast. And so if I think about mornings with my grandma, I think about the smell of baked French toast like coming out. It was like a bread pudding thing. And it had a lot of sugar and cinnamon. And so I think of that smell. So smells are very much linked to memory and emotions. Okay, taste works similar to smell. So this is taste and smell kind of go together, which is why when you taste your food, you also are smelling your food. And that's because they use the same type of chemical receptors. So sound and balance, we're talking about the physical bending of hair cells. For light, we're talking about photoreceptors, detecting that light. For smell and taste, we're talking about chemical receptors binding these molecules. For your tongue, this occurs, or for taste, it occurs on your tongue on taste buds, which are located on the sides of your papilla or on the tops in your tongue in different locations. And the taste are going to send that information to a few different cranial nerves. So they're going to have little taste pores that have receptors for chemicals, and it sends it through your different cranial nerves depending on where on your tongue it occurs. Now, don't get confused here about hairs. So the cells have little cilia and some little microvilli technically that emerge from your taste pore that make up your taste bud. But these are not the same hairs. They don't detect via bending. They detect via chemicals. Your tongue and your taste buds and the cells here, those are quickly replaced. So if you burn your tongue, you might lose the sense of taste. Like if you drink really hot coffee in the morning, you're like, can't taste my breakfast. Usually by lunch and dinner, you can taste it again. And that's because taste buds are replaced very, very quickly by these cells at the deeper level called your basal cells. Your basal cells will go up. And they protect your sensory nerves which are located deep in your tongue. So when you burn your tongue, you're not actually damaging your nerves, you're damaging these receptors for chemicals. and those are replaced. And we have 5 taste sensations that we actually taste. When you're tasting something that's like bitter, that is the detection of a basic chemical. So something that is a base, alkaline chemical. And that occurs on the back of your tongue. If you taste something sweet, that is binding to a receptor for our sugar or some amino acids. And interestingly enough, lead. Lead binds to the same receptors that sugar does, which is why little kids like to eat lead paint, which is terrible for them, because lead apparently tastes sweet. So if you have that binding to a sweet receptor, chemicals that bind to sweet receptors, again, are our sugars and some amino acids, and also, unfortunately, lead. And then we have sour receptors. These bind to acids, so things that we taste as sour, things like lemons, for example, or citrus fruit. That's because they have a lot of acid in them. So things that are bitter, we're tasting a base. Things that are sour, we're tasting an acid. We also have receptors for salts. Those are things like sodium, chloride, potassium. They're going to bind to our salt taste bud area. And the last is this taste called umami, which you might have heard about. It's the technical term for things that taste like a meat, so like red meat, a cheeseburger, things that have that meaty taste. And that's from the amino acid glutamate. So glutamate specifically will bind to your umami receptors and will give you the taste of meat, meaty, or like hearty. Mushrooms also have a lot of glutamate, and so they'll taste kind of meaty, like cooked mushrooms. Some cheese rinds have that meaty taste. It's not only meat, but those will bind to those receptors. So again, for taste and smell, we're talking about chemicals or molecules binding to a receptor. We have different types of receptors. In your mouth, those are in our taste buds, some in different parts of your tongue. Again, different types of molecules will bind to different types of receptors and give you different tastes or smells. Okay. So you want to be able to answer some of those questions. And that is it. So we finished up today, chapter 8. We talked about some hearing disorders. We went over the 2 different types of equilibrium, both static and dynamic. And then we ended with smell and taste. So with that, we'll take any questions.